So
Here we go.
here we go.
Hello, and welcome to today's show of Sum It Up. Do we have an extraordinary guest in line for you today? An artist, an activist, a cultural force who has redefined what it means to use creativity as power, his drawing power. In fact, has sparked a movement, and it's blended art and activism to create what people are calling artivism. I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm Joelle Martinez, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Harry Hollins. And Harry, I guarantee you are sitting literally on the edge of your seat in New York, where you're joining us from us today, because this is your guest. This is the guest you've been waiting for. Why is this guest so special to you?
Oh, we're gonna jump into it, and I've been just waiting for this last couple weeks. And when Edgardo, we're so just honored and excited to have you as our guest. And for those who may not know, Edgardo Miranda-Rodriguez is nationally recognized writer, artist, activist, and creator of La Borinqueña, which I have right here. But I've had for a while. We're gonna jump into it because there's a deep story behind that. And I also have to say, Boricua from New York City. And for those listening in, if you know what that means, then you know. And me is supposed to be Boricua, so I definitely know what that means. Thank you so much, Edgardo, for joining us. We have so much to talk about, and we want to jump into it. But before we talk about all your great work and accomplishments, I'd like to take it back a bit. And can you talk about your growing up in New York City and Puerto Rico? I know you didn't have it easy, but also how that got you interested in comics and developing superheroes.
I was always attracted to the arts. Unfortunately, as a child that grew up poor, I wasn't culturally aware that many institutions in New York City were available to me, even like, for free, like with suggested donations. So I found other ways to find that fulfillment. And comic books were very accessible because they were affordable in my youth. And growing up in abject poverty, I would literally walk my dog and collect bottles and cans in the 80s. And ironically, 40 years later, you still only get a nickel for bottles and cans. But back then, I could buy a comic book for 50 or 60 cents. Even though today they're like $5, that's a lot more bottles and cans. That was something that fueled my imagination. It fueled my creativity. As a child, I would get assignments every week with 10 new vocabulary words so that we would, as students, define these words, write them out as sentences. But on my own, I took the initiative to create episodic storytelling. So every week was a new chapter in a story that I was telling with 10 new vocabulary words, accompanied by illustrations. Eventually, I started developing myself as a young entrepreneur by actually committing myself to producing original comic books for friends that would pay me to make these comics. And that kind of like narrative centered around the genre of superhero storytelling really resonated with me because these narratives centered around characters that really fought for social justice. They fought for a better reality for everyone against all odds. Nowadays, these narratives and these publications have been appropriated, let's be honest, by corporations, and the narratives that inspire us and uplift us in all actuality are being controlled by corporations with boardrooms filled with Lex Luthors. So it's kind of ironic if you really think about it that way. And the goal of these superheroes today is to sell you tickets, to sell you products. But I took that narrative, that model that was created in 1938 by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster when they created Superman, the character that would literally create the superhero genre here in the United States, when they were faced with the height of anti-Semitism and fascism here in the United States. These two young 20-something-year-old artists and writers created Superman. So that model has stayed with me decades later. And many other artists and writers like George Perez, who was originally from the Bronx, inspired me with his model of philanthropy. Artists like writers like Chris Claremont, who did Uncanny X-Men. These artists and writers in this space of a corporatization of storytelling inspired me to create a model that fueled my activism and my space as a storyteller. And to this day, I've going into our 10th anniversary next year with La Borinqueña. I continue to find ways to make this model sustainable, keep this model viable, and keep it relevant to newer readers. And every day we're discovering and introducing our work to new readers, which is amazing. It really is. Even like, this conversation, and I've been seeing your posts, Harry, how you've been introduced to my work. That to me is very inspiring, because we don't have a very traditional model of publishing. We have more of a direct to consumer model of publishing, which means that you can buy our books at events that I'll speak at, or a few partnering bookstores, or directly off our website, right? But we're not distributed nationally. You're not going to find us in Barnes and Noble. You're not going to find us at Target. You're not going to find us at all these different brick and mortar bookstores, because we're not part of the mainstream, even though our stories are told in the mainstream genre of superhero storytelling, and the production value equals that of other publications. And on top of that, what makes us also unique is we believe in the power of philanthropy. We believe in the power of charity, which is something that even though the narrative superheroes kind of like tell are around overcoming evil and making the world a better place, they're not really giving back. These books and these models don't give back. And if they do, occasionally it's an afterthought. But that's something that's been incorporated into our model since the beginning. Figure out ways to keep the model and to keep the project tethered to the community, tethered to the people, or as we were saying in español, conectado al pueblo.
I don't even know where to begin. There's so much in there that I want to dig a little bit deeper in. Sure. But you, part of your story and part of your success, you were just naming a whole bunch of people that inspired you, people that maybe you never knew that inspired you. But I'm really curious, you sit in a very special place, a place, in my opinion, where there's far too many Latinos creating the artistry, the narrative, the storytelling, publishing, selling it, putting it out there. We have a lot of work to do to be more representative there. But I'm curious, tell me a little bit about the people along your journey before launching the comic, before launching the company and the business model. Who helped lift you up? Who helped inspire you along the way? We believe in social capital being really the key. It's not necessarily talent or ambition, but people. How did people help you reach your success?
The most important people in my life who have kind of brought me to where I am right now would be my madrinas, my mentors. Iris Morales, who is recognized historically as one of the original members of the Young Lords Party, which was a civil rights activist group in the late 60s and 70s here in New York City, Philadelphia, Chicago, and in Puerto Rico. Dr. Marta Moreno Vega, who is an institution builder, one of the co-founders of El Museo del Barrio, one of the leading scholars internationally on Afro-Boricua scholarship. My aunt, Liliana de Jesus, who is an educator and has been dedicated to social work and children's and child development for decades. And my partner and wife, Kyung Jun Miranda, who is a fine artist, a teaching artist, an endometriosis patient, and a voice for women's health and reproductive rights. These women have been integral to my growth and development as a professional. And I've also received most of my mentorship from women who are connected to community work, to education, to activism. Ironically, I've never received any mentorship from any entrepreneurs or businessmen or anyone in the traditional space of business. This has been a model that I've kind of developed myself over time. And even recently, I was speaking with a colleague, another fellow comic book writer, Roberto Cruz, about it. It's a work in progress. And like we say in Puerto Rico, it's en la brega. I'm like still kind of like messing around trying to figure this out. And,
who isn't?
and it's in 9 years going on our 10th anniversary, we're still 100% independent. And it's important to emphasize where this may be perceived as something inspiring and uplifting, like, wow, this is great. We're controlling our own narratives. But this is also really coming from a place of necessity, because mainstream publishers did not give us opportunities. Mainstream studios did not give us opportunities. So this was not, como te digo, the idea, the initial idea. Most traditional writers put together a pitch, shop it around, and hope to be picked up by a publisher or a studio so that those resources from these corporations can then be invested in the development of this product. That wasn't the case for us, and still isn't. We've had many conversations with studios and publishers, celebrities, goodness, dozens, and still here we are, 100% independent. And that comes from a place because we need to continue to tell these stories. We need to continue to produce these publications, and also still kind of put it out there to say that we're still looking for partnerships. So that's one of the things that's kind of has been a model for success for us that I've learned from my madrinas and my mentors, to kind of look to public institutions or brands. We've teamed up with the Natural Resources Defense Council when we did a publication that centered around renewable energy. We teamed up with almost 100-year-old chocolate brand from Puerto Rico, the Chocolate Cortez, to create a campaign that actually added our comic into a comic strip within the actual wrapper of the chocolate bars to talk about sustainable farming. So even though it was a product, it's still within the space of kind of climate justice and environmental consciousness, right? And also looking at other opportunities which would be perceived as traditional or non-traditional, like for example, like these action figures. These action figures are available in comic book shops and through our websites across the United States because we did a partnership with a toy company. And this is quite possibly the first toy line that was ever created that has writing on the packaging that says that a portion of the sales of these action figures are going towards charitable work in Puerto Rico. I bet you right now, if you go to any toy shelf and Target or anywhere else across the United States, you're not going to find any other products that are going to say that. But that's the model. So when we even when we do partnerships, we tell our brand partners that's the prerequisite. You're going to work with us. You're going to also understand that this is going to go towards our charitable work. And we also, tell our partners that this is coming from your side. We're not taking this out of our cut. You're investing in our work, investing in licensing our intellectual property, but you're also investing in our continued charity work. So it's a work in progress. It's a project that we're developing. So I kind of wear, in typical Latino style, tengo muchos diferentes trabajos. It's like I'm like el cocinero, lavaplatos, el que hace la compra, el que trae la compra. It's like everything, right? So it's like I'm the writer, I'm the publisher, creative director, marketer, publicist, public speaker, the face of this, And so it's work. It's work, but it's work that is rewarding. When I have opportunities to have conversations with you, Joelle, and when you, Harry, because it affirms that this is something that is resonating and it's hitting someone and many people differently. It'll hit you as a woman, it'll hit you as a parent, it'll hit you as a nerd, it'll hit you as an activist, it'll hit you as an educator. And it's not exaggerating when I tell you that there are scholars internationally that are teaching La Borinqueña. From across the United States to Europe to parts of Latin America, people take these my graphic novels and they teach them. And it's fascinating because that was never the goal when I wrote this book. But when a scholar opens this book, they see something in the storytelling that has merit that needs to be taught. And that's something that, again, as part of this model that we've created, that finds itself in very interesting and new and unique spaces.
Yeah. Well, cheers to all your madrinas. Yesterday was National Latina Day. We should celebrate them every day. All three of us would not be here without the women, the mentors in our life, telling it like it is.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned how it has hit different people, and I can tell you, Edgardo, it hit me in 2021. I was in Vail San Juan, and I live in Puerto Rico. Mi esposa y Boricua. And we were walking through a bookstore. So you may not be in the major bookstores, but you were in the bookstore in Vail San Juan. And I literally walked in the door and this was there. And I stopped, and it literally stopped me in my tracks because I looked at the cover and I said, what is this? Afro Boricua, Afro Latina. And I looked at my daughter and I looked at the cover and I looked at my daughter and I looked at the cover and I said, that's my daughter. And so it had just this punch just kind of in the gut. And so I have to ask you, how and why did you come up with the idea and the concept and the story of La Borinqueña?
The idea came to me near the end of 2015 when then Governor Padilla of Puerto Rico had announced that Puerto Rico had amassed a $74 billion unpayable debt. And this inevitably would lead to a fiscal management board that is back in the news again 10 years later because current administration has terminated, I believe, 5 to 6 roles in that. And you're in the financial district, so you know this story very well. But this is also endemic to Puerto Rico's colonial status, that they are not even empowered enough to handle their own self-determination in the space of their finances. So understanding the severity of this, I recognized that immediately this was going to lead, and it did, to a humanitarian crisis. And I thought to myself, there needs to be something that is produced that could engage people in a discourse beyond the financial world, beyond financial media, to bring it into a mainstream pop cultural space to discuss the reality of living in, and then 2015 or today in 2025 as people who are in a colony. And so the idea was, it has to be through pop culture. I come from a generation that saw the power of pop culture to create social change with musical projects like We Are the World, USA for Africa, and all of those other initiatives that were led by pop stars, musicians. And in the space of comic books, there had been some philanthropic projects that had been created specifically around the time of crisis. But what I decided to do was to enter into the space as someone who always loved comic books, but also as someone who was an educator, a father, and an activist, and saw the merit that comic book storytelling had to really bring this reality into a story. And oftentimes these social issues that affect Puerto Rico find themselves as tropes in science fiction. Oh, the evil, maniacal shadow corporations that are running things behind the closed doors, or the corrupt governments, or the evil plots to usurp land and power away from people. I mean, this is legitimately happening in Puerto Rico and across the world in many developing nations. And even like the idea of people being experimented on so that, superhuman abilities could come. Well, people have been experimented on for generations. If you look at the history of eugenics throughout developing nations, including Puerto Rico, women and people of color specifically have been experimented on to find cures for diseases, or to develop birth control pills, or unknowingly, many women in developing nations, including Puerto Rico, were sterilized. So I wanted to create a project that would really kind of like organically and almost like naturally tell these stories, even though they appear as tropes. And that's where the idea came from. And I decided that the character was going to be a superhero, because I wanted the character to be unapologetically patriotic and powerfully embracing her Latinaness, her Afro-Latinaness, and recognizing that even within Latino media, there is a lot of colorism, there is a lot of bigotry, there is a lot of racism, misrepresentation, underrepresentation, and put it out there that as people who are Latin, we are an ethnic group. We're not a race. We are all races. Therefore, if there is an Afro-Latina superhero, she's still representing our heritage, because our heritage is based on our ethnicity, not based on our skin color. But when people in power control the production and dissemination of images, they provide and produce a narrative oftentimes that is very skewed. And we have been for generations conditioned to see the standards of beauty centered around Eurocentric ideals. And when you're looking at Latino identity, it overlaps with the African diaspora, with the indigenous diaspora, with the Asian diaspora, right? The multicultural, biracial diaspora. So a character like La Borinqueña resonates beyond the Puerto Rican community. She resonates as a character of color throughout the entire African diaspora. You have many people of African descent from the Caribbean, from continental Africa to across the United States, who see themselves in La Borinqueña too, as well as other Latinos, right? So that was really where I drew inspiration to create this. But I also want to tell good stories. At the core of my work, I really am very, very fixated on creating a narrative over the course of these 9 years, 8 publications that are interconnected, that are part of a larger canon, part of a larger universe, even as we introduce new characters that tell and continue to tell this larger story that I've been developing over the last 9 years. And so I wanted to do this and do it in a space which is dominated by white male narratives.
Yeah.
And occasionally there will be a standout character of color in mainstream media. But the reality is, when you grab that cookie and there are a couple of chocolate chips in that cookie, it doesn't make it a chocolate cookie. It's a chocolate chip cookie, right? And so the industry has a couple of little areas that are dedicated to characters of color, but that is not representative of what the entire industry is. And with the current climate in our nation of kind of like downplaying diversity and disempowering narratives centered around people of color, I think now more than ever, as people of color, we have to embrace our power, we have to embrace our narrative, and we have to support. This is dope, this conversation, but I'm gonna put it out there. We need people to actually buy our books. We need people to actually support our books. Likes and engagement on social media is dope, but if that's really centered around more of a curious interaction than a transactional interaction. And we really need to put our money where our heart is and really invest in our arts. If you look at studies produced recently by the Annenberg Foundation, overwhelmingly they're showing us that Latinos in the United States are the largest consumer population that are contributing to products and media that is significantly underrepresenting them. That means that we're buying books, we're buying the Harry Potters, we're watching the Mission Impossibles, even though we don't see ourselves there. Right? Yeah. We've conditioned ourselves to see that anything that is mainstream is technically blanquito. Yeah. Let's be real, right? And if it's black, oh, that's urban. Or if it's Latino, oh, that's Spanish language. Most Latin people in the United States don't even speak Spanish. You know what I mean? And so does that mean that we're not Latino because we don't speak Spanish, because we're second, third, fourth generation born here? No. It's still part of our DNA. It's still part of our family heritage. It's still part of our identity. And we still have stories that we need to tell and are telling.
Yeah. Again, so much there. First of all, before I ask my next question, I really want to amplify what you say. Harry and I talk about this all the time. You know, people will talk about 4.1 trillion in GDP and Latino consumption rate, but that means nothing if we're not investing in ourselves and circulating our dollars within the Latino community and actually investing in the products and services produced by and for our community. And we have to really leverage our own economic power, not only to support artists and products like the ones you are creating, but beyond that. I mean, we talked bodegas last time in our last episode. We have economic power. We need to learn to use it and leverage it. But on this other, I got to tell you, so in full transparency, didn't grow up reading comics. My kids would be so embarrassed because I still probably don't know the difference between the superheroes from Marvel or DC. You're lucky to know that there's two of them. But I got to tell you, Harry brought in the comic book and I physically touched it on Monday and I'm looking through it and I won't get emotional, but I will get a little sentimental because it wasn't just that it was Latino, Latina, that there was representation from an ethnicity. You chose a woman. You chose a Latina, educated, Columbia, you know, so we're not going to the community college, nothing wrong with that, but you chose educated, powerful, you know, socially minded Latina, and who wasn't over-sexualized as we usually are, who wasn't, you know, carrying stereotypical roles. You know, to Harry's point, not only does his daughter see himself in that, but I saw myself in that. And I want you to share a little bit, hearing a little bit about the madrinas in your life and your aunt and others. Maybe I have a better understanding, but why a Latina? And I want to juxtaposition the decision at the time that you did it, because 2015, 2016, 2017, as a nation, as a world, actually, we were, you know, that masculinity, that power, that dominance, it was real in politics and corporate boardrooms. I mean, it was right in our face. And here Marisol comes and she's this fierce Latina. Tell us about that.
Marisol La Borinqueña's timeline is very interesting, and I'm glad you brought that out. She was created at the height I can honestly say of like superhero pop culture, right? You know, some people refer to this era in the film industry as superhero fatigue, but in 2015, 2016, that was the height. That was right before the giant, you know, tentpole Avengers movies came out. That was also in between different administrations. It was closing out the second Obama administration. It was also right before and during Hurricane Maria. It was during the pandemic. It was at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, and now it's at the height of the anti-DEI movement. So, I mean, if you created like como se dice, like not a bar graph, yeah, like a line graph.
Yeah,
You know, it would look like almost like an EEG at a hospital. Line,
seriously.
the heartbeat back. You know what I mean? And through it all, La Borinqueña continues to exist. La Borinqueña as a series continues to thrive. And I have been someone who has always been perceived and labeled as not Latino, not Puerto Rican, because of my vernacular, because of my vocabulary, because of my credentials, because of how I shape up my beard and my hair, for example. You know, I'm in New York City, but I don't look like a Puerto Rican from New York City. And the reality is that most of us don't fit those stereotypical roles. Most of us are nerds. Most of us are workers. Most of us are intellectuals. Most of us, you know, are very much grounded in the relationships we have in our families and for our families. And I wanted a character that represented that. And I'm exhausted, quite honestly, at the myopic perception and representation of Latinos in mainstream media. It upsets me and incenses me that every role that you see on TV and in books centers around a narrative of criminality, centers around a narrative of the base natures of people in society, and that has to be us, you know, and also, and not in a negative fashion, but a lot of our narratives in mainstream storytelling centers on this international idea of who we are, and not stories about us living in the United States. And the interesting story about creating a character like La Borinqueña, who lives in Puerto Rico, is like I told the line because Puerto Rico is part of the United States, but then Puerto Rico is also part of Latin America. It's in this very kind of like intermediate space, you know, this nexus of different realities of being a Latin American nation. Because and Harry, you know this, when you live in Puerto Rico, you don't live in New York. You feel like you're in Latin America, but then there's sometimes you're like, yeah, this isn't exactly Latin America either, you know, because I have my US dollars, and there's still like the signs look like the same signs that are in Florida or New York City when I'm on the highway and such, right? So when I tell the stories in from the perspective of them being in Puerto Rico, that's still a US story. Everything that happened in Puerto Rico is still part of US history, right? So that's kind of like the unique space of storytelling. So in creating this character, for me, it was important that it was a young woman that represented a part of us that oftentimes in mainstream media, we don't see celebrated. Forget about represented. I'm talking about celebrated. My oldest son is going to be a senior at Connecticut College. He has a great GPA. He's an environmental sciences student. He started his academic growth when Marisol, her story was first published in 2016, and he was in middle school. And he has kind of like mirrored her life. During the pandemic, he rode his bicycle to high school when we lived in Brooklyn in Manhattan, and he went to school in Manhattan. And he would tell me, Dad, I'm like Marisol, I'm riding my bicycle to school. And then he's like, Dad, I'm like Marisol, I'm environmental sciences. And I was like, yeah, except you don't have the superpowers in the Cape. You know? and I think of my son, and I think of so many other brown children, right, that are great students, that are professionals, that are entrepreneurs, that are, you know, the heads of their families. And it's like those are the stories that need to be told. And also oftentimes, even in stereotypical superhero stories, the superhero becomes a superhero because something transforms them to finally develop some moral character. You know, Batman, Bruce Wayne had to have his multi-billionaire parents die in front of him for him to become a superhero. You know, Tony Stark had to lose his heart to literally gain a heart to become a superhero, right? And et cetera, et cetera. All these characters always have to have something tragic happen to them. I didn't want that to be the story for Marisol, because the women that I grew up with didn't have something tragically happen to them for them to become the leaders and the heroes of our communities. They just said, parece que nadie va a hacer este trabajo, voy a tener que hacerlo yo. You know what I mean? Which is kind of like the what you call it, the burden that women carry in society, because men growing up in a patriarchal society, we live and exist in the comfort of not having to worry about anything. And it takes a man a lot to get out of that natural state of comfort to say, okay, let me look around and see what I can do, and not just ask my wife for a to-do list, because then she needs the brain power to say, ahora tengo que yo decirle a este chamaco qué hacer. I'm like, look around and be like, okay, I know we need this, we got to do this, and take care of it. And so the women around me have always been that way, because society has forced women to lead without the title of being leaders.
See.
Right? And Latinas have always been like the head of households, and women have always been the head of households without the title of being a head of household, because the man brings in the salary as a sole breadwinner in some homes. All of a sudden, but in my home, I'm like, no, my wife she's the captain. She runs the family. She's the CEO of our family. And so that kind of real motto inspired me to say, then the hero has to be a woman. And then the other part of it, as a child, every time I was in Puerto Rico when I was living there, when I would visit, and especially when I visited my family in Ceiba, Puerto Rico, every time I got out of the car and made it to their house, I kissed the earth. And my family thought I was a weirdo, because we grew up very conservative Pentecostal. And I'm like, ¿Dónde rayo este chamaquito aprendió a hacer eso? You know, so here I was kneeling, kissing the earth, asking for Puerto Rico's blessing, because I always saw as my island as my kind of like a maternal figure for me. And then I would later learn about the Tainos and their cosmology, and how the mother goddess was, the supreme deity was a woman. So all of this kind of like naturally connected. And then I started doing a deeper dive into history. I started realizing that very significant pivotal moments in Puerto Rico's history were connected and tethered to the contributions that women gave and the sacrifices that women gave. So it just felt like a natural progression to develop a character that would be a woman.
I love that, and couldn't agree more. We talk about that all the time, and that's a narrative we have to change and continue to change. And there's unfortunately considerable work that still needs to be done, but we have to do that work. And you mentioned several times kind of your connection to Puerto Rico. You obviously grew up both in Puerto Rico and New York City, and I assume you've been going back and forth for quite some time. As I mentioned, I live in Puerto Rico. I'm not Boricua, mi esposa Boricua, but one thing is you can feel the deep love and pride for the island. I always joke, growing up, I met my wife 40 years ago, and her family, Noricans, and you learn two things: never disrespect the island, never disrespect the flag,
right?
Or the heat coming your way is you don't want that. But you always rep the island hard, and I would love to hear from you. Where does that pride come from, and how does it manifest in your work and in your life?
The pride comes from being told through media that's produced, being told through scholarship that we don't exist, being told, and literally by not being told, we're being told this. There's no narrative that is literally saying chapter 12 in your American history book why Puerto Rico doesn't exist. No, it's more like you get through the 24 chapters of your history books and Puerto Rico is never mentioned, right? And when you're constantly not seeing yourself, and when you're at a point in your life, you realize that in order to learn about yourself, you have to educate yourself. My scholarship and my knowledge of Puerto Rican history is self-taught. These are books, these are conversations, these are podcasts that I listen to. I listen to Radio Universidad on my smart device because it streams like Puerto Rico's public radio. So I get to listen to talk shows that talk about everything from current events in Puerto Rico to conversations with scholars about the arts or history and culture or music, right? This is something that I do to fuel myself so that I feel significant, so that I feel powerful, because I don't subscribe to the ideology that I am a part of a minority, because by calling myself that, I am embracing the fact that I am less than. Not only less than numerically in the quote so-called population, but less than as a human being, less than in terms of my merit and my value. And I disagree with that wholeheartedly. And so, and then as a father, I want to infuse my sons with a sense of pride that comes from love of their heritage. And in our home, we have a mixed heritage. We're of Puerto Rican and Korean heritage. And we balance both of those through language, through arts, through food, through travel. Our connection to our heritage is very important. My sons have a very strong connection to Puerto Rico because of the work we do with La Borinqueña, especially because after Hurricane Maria, my family in Puerto Rico lost their homes and all of them moved to the diaspora. All of them live in the United States. Now, I have some very distant cousins in Puerto Rico, but I don't have personal relationships with them like my immediate family that left. So our charitable work, our advocacy work in Puerto Rico is what gives my sons and myself and my wife a connection to Puerto Rico. And that is something that fuels us. And we get it back when we do events in Chicago or Philadelphia or in San Juan, because when we go to Puerto Rico or across the United States and we find ourselves in the spaces with other Latinos and other Puerto Ricans, they give us that affirmation that they really love the work that we're doing. And that is really where it comes from. But I think at its core, beyond my personal contribution as an artist and storyteller, as a people, when you are told historically that you don't matter and you don't exist, and then when you learn that historically our flag, the Puerto Rican flag, by our own people was actually outlawed under a law that mirrored the McCarthy era laws of the United States, right? That said that this flag is illegal. This conversation about Puerto Rico and its independence and its history is illegal. This congregation that's having this conversation is illegal, and that you would be fined up to $10,000 or you would be imprisoned. That history is very real. The fact that that law was repealed and a year after that law was repealed was when the first National Puerto Rican Day Parade occurred in New York City is no coincidence. Now, what has happened over time is the disconnect, the severing of ourselves to that history. But something in our DNA, it's like that phrase in Spanish, la sangre llama, right? Something has always been telling us to say that web out louder than anybody else. But when you figure out that history, you go, tienes razón. That's why it all makes sense now, right? That's that kind of like crystallized moment where everything kind of like makes sense. And that's kind of like where it comes from. And it's a different sense of pride. And I will also say, like, after Hurricane Maria, there was a lot more of a disconnect between Puerto Rico and the diaspora here in the United States. And it was always this kind of like from Puerto Ricanos on the island, like, what is the deal with Puerto Ricans in the US and this kind of like obsession with the flag? But after Hurricane Maria, when the diaspora stepped up because the administration stepped down, and diaspora came in with resources and physically put boots to the ground to help in the rebuilding and in the reconstruction of Puerto Rico, that perception has changed. And you have pop artists like Bad Bunny that embraces the diaspora as well as Puerto Rico. And he's fueling a new generation of young people to kind of like have a sense of pride in their heritage beyond the Puerto Rican community, right? I think that is at its core why I am as passionate as I am, because I as a people, our history has been criminalized. Y mira, no te creas, eso está pasando ahora. Being Latin is literally becoming criminalized in the United States. We are literally being rounded up because of our melanin and our last names. You know what I mean? And it has now become normalized in the last few months of this administration. So now more than ever, we need the arts. Now more than ever, we need to support stories that reflect back at us who we are and remind us of our innate and inherent superpower. Because in the face of all this hate, in the face of this blatant wave of white supremacy that is literally trying to whitewash and erase our history, I'll tell you right now, one of the most proudful moments we have in our history as a publication, as a superhero series, is when the Smithsonian Museum added our book to their permanent collection. That is a reflection of the power that this story has. And an institution that is affiliated with the federal government recognized the value of our work and said, no, this needs to be a part of the Smithsonian. Right now, when there's a movement under this administration that is literally trying to erase the contributions of people of color, and even try to create a narrative that say slavery was not bad. ¿Qué locura es eso? You know what I mean? So it's like now more than ever, we need to understand why we are as passionate about what we are and why it is important to put capital behind our heritage and investment behind our heritage, because we are going to see fewer and fewer initiatives, productions that are going to center on our narratives. And now more than ever, we need people to come together to see the value in our own stories so that our stories don't disappear. It's happened before. And the one thing about history, when you don't study it, it will repeat itself again.
See.
And it's happening. It is literally happening. Like as we're having this conversation, it is literally happening in this country.
I usually end the show and wrap us up and do the sum it up and say what this is all about. But honestly, how do I even follow that mic drop? But I have to amplify it, and I have to speak on behalf of the community we've built and say that it is not time to sit on the sidelines. It is not okay to be silent and let the history not only be erased, which is scary enough, but rewritten in a way that really changes the narrative and changes our position in society as a whole. So absolutely is the time where we have to rise, we have to resist, and we have to repeat, and we have to invest, and we have to buy and support your work. And so before we conclude today, I'm going to make sure everyone knows how to get their hands on it. But all of our artists, our storytelling, we have power. We have power of the story. We have power of our purses. We have power when we come together. That's the whole point of Sum It Up. We are powerful when we are together. And I just want to amplify that this is not the moment to let those stories be hidden or rewritten. We need to support folks like you doing the good work so that we make sure that those history is not only told, but told correctly and that we're seen. And to answer Marvin's question, how do we support the generation to embrace their Latinidad? Well, the first thing is Latinidad has to be visible. It has to be known before we can even embrace it.
Yes.
And as the erasure begins, that's when we use highlighters and pens and colors to amplify it in movies and stories. So thank you on behalf of our community for the work you're doing. How do we support you and your work more?
Visit our website, la-borinqueña.com. Learn about the charitable organizations that we support. You could donate to our foundation. Aprendes is the foundation, the fiscal agents conduit that we use, not conduit, institution that we use to award grants. This September, we're returning to Puerto Rico to recognize 10 women as our heroínas del pueblo, the La Borinqueña heroínas del pueblo. So we continually are devoting a portion of our sales to our charity work. Buy our books. If you enjoy reading them, buy others, encourage others to buy books. This is what I love about Latinas, and brothers need to step up. When we do events, women come to our table and say, me voy a comprar 5 libros. I'm going to buy one for myself, one for my sister, one for my tia, and I'm going to get a couple of others in case I find somebody. That's honestly the model that I love, and that's the model that will keep us afloat, because the reality is we're a small independent project that is only as powerful as the word attributed to it is. So if you read our books, like Harry did, for example, post it on social media, post a short little review. It could be like a few sentences, or it could be a video of yourself. One of the most recent endorsements that we received that was like purely came out of love was by Emmy Award-winning actor Liza Colón-Zayas from The Bear, who literally made her own video wearing a La Borinqueña hat that she bought, holding a La Borinqueña comic book she bought. She starts reading from the comic book, and she's like, this book is dope. Right? We need more of that, because they're not going to find us in big chain brick and mortar stores. You're not. That's just something, unfortunately, that's not available to us. And if there are voices out there, individuals out there that are interested in collaborating with us through investments or other ideas, reach out to us via our website, via social media. We're very open to dialogues. We're very open to collaborations, brand collaborations. And also we are in a space now where we're seeking public funding and support to continue to grow this model. Next year is our 10th anniversary, and it's only going to be a bigger celebration if the community can come together to help us grow. Porque falta. We still have a lot more to go. we still have a lot more to go. And I really appreciate both of you guys giving me this opportunity to share my story with you all.
Our pleasure. We appreciate you, appreciate your work. We'll continue to amplify the message, everything you said, everything Joelle said. We have so much power within our diaspora. And I view you not as a great storyteller, but also a bridge builder. And we need that at this time more than ever.
Yes, that's definitely agree with that. Thank you both. Thank you so much.
We'll make sure everyone knows where to buy your products. Thank you everyone for joining today. And until next time, take care, everyone.
Take care.